Hi everyone, and welcome back to another watercolor class. Today we're going to be doing another loose little hedgehog here, and there's not a whole lot that I'm really going to pre-draw in before this. So if you want, you can kind of establish here kind of where your ground area is. And if you want to kind of think about, I'm just going to use some little dashed lines as far as like where his little body is going to go. So kind of almost kind of like potato shaped, I guess, is a good way to look at it. And then, so this is all going to be very loose in here. And then we're just going to give a little detail into his face. So if we kind of plan here where his eyes are going to go, his little nose, and then he's got his little paws kind of come here. All right, so I'm just mapping that out. Okay, so I've got those basic little parts in, and I will start in with just doing some of this basic part here. I might want to just note maybe kind of where these little ears are. Okay, that one's over too far. So like here in this case, like if I make a mistake with my colored pencil, I can just come in with a damp little brush and just kind of pull that right off. I think I'll move that one too. Keep him a little closer to his face, like that. All right. So I've got some kind of like unexpected colors in here where I'm using a little bit more of those kind of pink and fleshy tones, rather than keeping him all like brown. So I'll use a little bit of my magenta, a little bit of my burnt sienna. Let's bring that in there. I knew that wasn't quite the right tone for that. Okay, so when I put this in, I do want my colors to be a little bit more of that lighter wash. So I'm going to thin this down here, and then just kind of looking at where those edges of his body are going to be. I'm just going to tap in just some little, kind of like that little soft outline of that. And now that that's wet, if I want to drop in a little more intensity, but still on the most part keep that textured and light. Remember, I don't want to fill all of this in. I want to leave some little white space in between there just to make it a little more textured. And then as we transition up in here, okay, bring a little bit of that burnt sienna kind of color in. Just kind of let those transition to each other. All right. See, based on where the edge of his face is and his ear is, that'll kind of help me to judge kind of where that shape of his body is going to come. And then we'll pick up a little bit of the burnt umber. All right, and there. And then here we can kind of tap in a little bit for his ear shape. I'll just dissolve my color there for the pencil, and then I'm just going to kind of lay in a little bit for the shape of his face. So I'm going to kind of bring that's a little more intense than I want it there, so I'm going to blot out and just kind of move that around. I'm going to come kind of on the forehead, down loosely, and then kind of that edge of his face here. Just keep that nice and soft, right? And then I'll show you here on this. So this side in here I'm going to leave white, and then I'm going to bring kind of that essence of his shoulder to his arm and just that hint of his foot. And then when we do this negative part of the painting, it's going to help kind of fill in the rest of that shape and also kind of give a sense that there's that little bit of highlight there around his body. So if his foot's here, so I'm going to kind of come down and think, you know, where that kind of shoulder to his leg. Okay. And then a little bit to his foot here. Kind of back this way. Just soften all that. Okay. All right. So, let's see what else he needs. So if I want to come in, I still want to keep it soft, but just in that little bit that this has had time to dry, I can just strengthen up some little bits of that. Just creating that little bit of color shifting. And I'll just do a little bit, because remember, we're going to be adding all this texture on top. And so if we've got the soft, and then now we've got some kind of soft texture that we're adding, that'll kind of read through. A little spot to dry, we'll deepen up right here along the edges, kind of define his face that way. I can go ahead and put in the area for his eyes and his nose. So the eyes, we can keep those nice and deep, and we want to save that little spot for a little bit of eye reflection. But on his nose, we're going to keep that a lighter gray, and then we'll come back and layer into it. So I've got, like where I've got the nostrils here, and then a little bit on that. But I'm going to keep this front part of his nose kind of light. So I'm going to use a little finer brush here to do that, so I can kind of get my shape in. And then I'm going to think about where that light reflection area is going to be. So I'll see where I'm going to keep that part white. I would say on the eyes, the thing to be careful with is not coming in and doing a distinctive round, perfectly round circle. You notice these are a little more oval. And then we can even kind of come in and inset this a little bit here towards where that eye duct area would be. See where I've got that little point coming in there. Up, and here I'll kind of plan for, you know, if you're in doubt, you can always make that eye reflection a little bigger than what you think you want it, and then come in and fill it in later. That's easier sometimes than going too small. And if it gets away from you and like maybe I close that up too much, I can always come back in with a little bit of some opaque white at the very end. Okay. So I like this size maybe a little bigger. I'm just going to kind of match that one up a little bit there. And then remember on the nose, we're going to come in a little thinner, so it's a little softer. And then we will come back, and then when this is dry, so we can add detail, kind of add the nostrils, and I'll make it a little darker on the top. So I want to keep it that lightest color. I don't need to keep it like, you know, bright white or anything, but if I just keep a nice little soft gray there as my kind of base coat. So while we've been working on that, we've given this time to dry. So I would say if you want to use a little bit of that black or a dark brown, or maybe a mixture of the two, you could probably come in and give them some little fingernails there. Right. So while I'm letting that dry, this is where I can come in and do that negative part before I start worrying about the texture. So I'm going to use my phthalo blue here for that. And I can tell that's already, there might have had a little bit of another color on there. It's not quite as bright as what it usually is. I usually will warm that up a little bit, and that's probably fine right there. So as I come in here with this, I'm going to use the shape of my brush, okay, to come in and kind of determine. I want to leave this kind of almost spiky as it comes up along his body. I can come up here closer. I'm going to imply that there's, you know, where his little quills are extending out beyond. And so notice how I'm bringing that around, coming off in the direction of his body. So while this is wet, this is where I'm going to kind of stop for a minute, and then now I can kind of pull this out. Remember, we want to eliminate leaving that distinctive edge. Bring a little water here and move that around. It doesn't all have to be filled in. Some of it can be kind of different intensities like that. Okay, let's drop a little bit in there. And then I can come on around this way. I'm going to follow that shape. Just kind of give that loose connection. Okay, so remember the key, I wanted to eliminate that real distinctive brush stroke that I was laying in around there, pulling it out and softening it. And then now while this is wet, you know, I can pull in a little bit more if I want to just kind of, you know, give some little tone variations just for interest. You can see how where that's wet, most of that's diffusing out really nicely. Okay, and you can see already how that kind of highlights his whole body along there. And for the ground floor area, we can really do about any color that we want. I've used a little bit of black and the blue, and I'll start off. I want that a little darker up in here under his body. Okay, so I'm going to come right up here right up here by his body, by the foot. Remember, if we leave that like that, we're going to have that brush stroke. So now I want to come in and start pulling that out. I picked up a little bit of the blue, and I want to keep working that until they mix. And then now I've got this little gradation going on. And we'll go over this again and make that a little darker up in there. And here's where you can kind of make up what you've got going on, and I'll go ahead and bring a little more intensity in here. And I'll bring a little more blue. All right. And we'll just kind of let that dry. And so now his body's had a little more time to dry. I'll use my burnt umber here. I'll mix that with some of the black. Okay, and you can see I'm not just give me a little bit of soupiness where you see that movement, like when you stir it around. That's going to have the flow going off of it. So remember, I want to follow the contour of his body. So I can start off, I'll just keep these random right now. I think those are probably a little stronger than what I want for this layer. So I've rinsed out and just kind of come back and I'm just gonna try to keep them random, following that shape of his body. So on this stage, I want them to be a little more softer, and then if I have that chance to kind of evaluate, I'll see if I want them more intense. So I'm going to take a quick second, just rinsing out my brush completely, blotting it out, and then if I kind of go over these a little bit if they need to be softened up a little. So some of these here I can kind of extend them into some of my areas here that have into that white area. And I'll place a few in here along there. And here's that thing where you have to kind of gauge and figure how much do you want. I would say don't go too overboard. Bring some down into there. Let's see here. We'll give him some little whiskers. We'll kind of go. I'm going to switch to that smaller brush so I can get a little more detail when I'm trying to do his nose. Okay. So here I can come in and kind of build those little nostrils. On top, even with this tiny brush, I just want, rather than leaving that as a line, I want to soften that out there a little bit. I think my eyes are okay on their intensity. Then here's where I'll come in with the bleed proof white, and I'll strengthen up the eye reflection on that one. I lost it just a little bit. And then I'll also give him just a hint of in his water line. So if I bring that back up, give him two little spots there, and then very lightly here I can bring in just a hint there, a little bit of the water line. Yep. I guess let me put it in and I'll put the black over it. So that is one of the, I think, the things about the bleed proof white is if I have a little spot that's like more than what I want, I can paint over it, you know, if I need to camouflage it. Like you see here on my brush where the fibers are separating. That means I need just a little bit of water in my brush to pull those back together. Not much, but it's just not going to behave for me if it's doing that. All right, so we have a cute little loose hedgehog, and depending on if there's something else you want to add to it, but I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and give it a thumbs up, and hopefully we'll see you for the next class.